like an empty shell on the bus station floor. Tight plastic hugs his face, the outline of his gaping mouth and lifeless eyes dusted with December's frosted rain. His bloodstream engorged with frozen, adulterated fentanyl. The police officer shoved the indifferent bystanders aside. The crowd walks to the far end of the platform and boards the bus. Amongst this crowd, a drug mule carries a fragrant bag of the loudest herb in his coat pocket. In his hands, a luminescent green potion. This concoction the drug mule called Green Gecko. This drink was initially bestowed on him by the mermaids of the double-sided oak. Besides the tree inhabited by anthropomorphic witch vixens, stands the great lake from which this elixir was brought forth, its hallucinogenic and dissociative properties beloved by many, but feared by the rest. The bus takes off into the snowy winter night. At least it wasn't late, remarked the mule. Outside of town, Agents Goggles and Mark are working for the Crystal Acquisition Program Delegation Associates, or CAPTAS as it was called. A CAPTAS is tasked with securing various historical artifacts throughout the world, chief among which are these mystical glowing blue crystals which hover a meter off the ground and seem to emit high levels of element 115. Not actually the real element 115, mind you, but the code word for an unknown substance supposedly found in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. A highly volatile substance of an unknown chemical makeup or origin. Now, one of these crystals is supposedly in the possession of one Wynlock McAllister and is located somewhere in the Perseus Lounge. The Perseus Lounge is this nightclub/underground art museum that is located somewhere outside of Seattle, Washington. The Perseus Lounge hosts strange art galleries of sorts and offers various types of spectacle, both mundane and obscene. The entrance to the Perseus Lounge is located on the side of a large hill. Through a secret passage, a tunnel leads several hundred feet down to a large hall flanked by statues of naked women with their arms outstretched, gesturing towards a large diorama that sits behind glass above the entrance to another long granite corridor. The diorama was three-dimensional and depicted a recreation of the famous painting Man Proposes, God Disposes, in which ravenous polar bears of the Northwest Passage feed on the bones of the crewmates of Captain Franklin's doomed 1845 expedition across the frozen hellscapes of northern Canada and Disco Island. But in this rendition, the crewmates themselves feed on the bones, not the polar bears. And tragically, this rendition was far more true to life. The most insidious part of this creation was that actual people posed and acted in these dioramas, a wall of unbreakable plexiglass sealing them in. If Wynlock was bored or he thought the performance was lacking a certain kick, he would have the ability to press a large button near the window that would open two hidden doors inside the diorama and unleash two ravenous polar bears, which would probably devour the actors. He apparently never had to do this, however, because he genuinely appreciated art and viewed even the most amateur and low-effort attempts as avant-garde or esoteric, and applauded them with a standing ovation. Quite different than typical critical reality. Though it took some time getting through the doorman, Goggles and Mark eventually stood amongst the other masked partygoers below as Wynlock stood high above the crowd in front of the diorama on a narrow catwalk. Goggles and Mark were wearing similar stereotypical neon green alien masks with large black eyes, small nostrils, and vacant expressions, dressed in black coveralls, gloves, and black sneakers similar to the type that the cults at the Gates of Heaven wore after they castrated themselves, took their no-go pills, covered themselves with dark purple shrouds, and succumbed to barbiturate overdose. The only noticeable difference between the two men physically while in these costumes was that Goggles took to wearing orange safety goggles over his mask because he had to live up to the family name, a tribute to his uncle who died of a computer virus. Wynlock stood on the catwalk looking over his adoring public with glee, taking a toke of a large electronic metal and glass bong full of cannabis indica, downing a medicine cup full of some bright, violet, vicious fluid. He looked rather unremarkable, but athletic in build, and walked with a swagger that hinted at possible multi-dimensional skeletal deformity. He wore a plush burgundy robe and a black goat mask, covering most of his face. His glowing green eyes shifted from left to right to up to down as he scanned the environment for any possible threat with a silent aura of paranoia. Though he was more than likely completely unaware of what was about to transpire as he slurred his words and swung to and fro with an intoxicated euphoria. Man, dig that organ. from ancient Egyptians. Ket, the physical body. Sa, the spiritual body. Ren, the sacred name. Ba, the personality of treachery. Ka, the vital essence which leaves your body when you die. Ib, the heart. Shun, the shadow. Sekhem, which dwells in the afterlife after judgment has been passed. The names and definitions we use for these concepts may be rendered outdated should information to the contrary be uncovered or translated further. Goggles turned a corner and walked past a large open room. In the room on the wall hung a large polymer oryx antelope head, painted bright green and blue with an orange stripe down the center of its face, with a yellow and red party hat on one horn and a large cannabis blunt hanging out of its mouth. A cannabis blunt that Goggles pocketed for later use. Beneath this garish spectacle sat an orange beanbag chair and an open carton of menthol cigarettes. Could take those too, Goggles thought. A few more twists and turns down the seemingly never-ending series of underground hallways, and an aquarium is filled with hungry cats and a twitching man with a burlap sack over his head, tied to a chair with a sign draped around his neck that read pedophile. He sits in this chair in a dark corner, illuminated like a museum exhibit. The ravenous cats proceed to tear into his flesh as he screams in tired agony. Even the smallest tortoiseshell kitten nibbles away at his toes before a large sandy-striped tabby bites into the man's jugular and silences his cries forever in a splash of crimson fruit punch. Goggles and Mark look away with indifference. They weren't there to save anyone, especially kitty-fiddling degenerates. Let the felon's face, I say, says Mark as he retrieved the bottle of barbecue sauce that he kept on his person since condiments were banned by the nanny state and local government some years ago. They did it for the new generation, the generation that's bottle-fed throughout life, those who held absolutely no accountability for their actions. You know the type, the ones who cry and piss themselves when they can't upload some tarted-up cunt-faced image of themselves to the social web cancer clouds so they can whore themselves out to sell bleach to those in possession of culture and intelligence to drink. When they have had enough and want to end it all, they nearly die only to be resuscitated by the government. Yes, men, I mean women, I mean people, I mean things, because the ones in power need their workers, their slaves. Do you think they care about you or your well-being? No, they just want your labor, and when you can't work, you either become a host-controlled parasite or you find yourself on the receiving end of an officer's body camera as it's shifted from one side, taking you out of view as the gunshots ring out and you drop to the curb, leaking crimson with fierce lungs and a spewing, squirting heart as the camera pans back over to you, twitching and gasping for air as the officers feign bewilderment and disgust as they exclaim, "Oh no, tisk, you shouldn't have moved, well." After administering the barbecue sauce to what remained of the man, Mark walked further down the hall and looked into the next room and gestured for Goggles to follow him. The two aliens entered the next room where they found a high vaulted ceiling and walls covered in a series of reddish gold Roman frescoes depicting squid, cuttlefish, assorted cephalopods, and an octopus or two, with wings and massive monocular eyes, adorned with shimmering violet jewels. Halos sat atop their heads. In the center of the room sat a staircase that led further down into darkness. Mark looked at the cephalopod frescoes with a type of nostalgia for a brief moment in which he visited Salem, Massachusetts. He recalled riding bus route 455 from the Wonderland bus station up through the perilous city of Lynn, where he was once beaten up and thrown off a train, and through the cold, sleepy town of Swampscott, where he nearly died of a cold. As Mark was seated on the bus, he remembered a man in a black hoodie at the back of the bus in the seat across from him. He watched the man as he rocked back and forth, rapping about how much he loved mustard. I can't remember the lyrics exactly, but between verses this man sang with so much passion and conviction that I'm sure even the gods of old knew of his genuine love for mustard. For all types of mustard: Dijon, brown, horseradish, yellow, etc. The bus finally got into town, but it was stopped by a road closure. As Mark waited for instructions from the bus driver, the strange passenger reached his hand up to the foggy window, and while continuing his deranged mustard hymn, he began to draw crucifixes in various sizes and at various angles around a large one-eyed squid adorned with a halo. This bizarre situation that stuck with Mark after all these years and seeing similar imagery initiated a brief lapse in awareness as he stared into empty space. Mark, wake up, Goggles said, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. Mark jolted awake and retrieved his silenced .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol and a small black flashlight from his pocket, turning the flashlight on as he pointed it and the pistol towards the bottom of the stairs. The next room was lit with projections of blue flames that hugged white marble walls. Cannabis plants of an unknown strain covered in crystalline coatings of frosty trichomes flanked both sides of the hallway, leading to a large painted marble statue of Hecate, the triple-headed goddess who guards the crossroads and mediated between the Titans and Olympians. In front of the statue floated their objective, the crystal they had sought. The crystal glowed a magnificent cerulean blue that seemed to slowly strobe and change intensity from highest to lowest, in and back again, in a never-ending sequence. Cyan characters of an alien language cover its sides. Rediscovered in the snow and was to be transported back to the lab. But as it arrived, it was discovered that the crystal was intercepted and molested by the Ukrainian battleship pirate ninjas, as they were called, and that the box that was supposed to contain the crystal was instead wired with a high-powered explosive. The explosive detonated and killed everyone inside. All the base belonged to the UBPN, ashes and melted element 115. Agent Pierce had escaped before the explosion, and he had discovered later that he had acquired chlamydia. He retired from CAPDAS and now resides in Toronto with his 3 pet tegus. And like all residents of this damned northern hemisphere, he is monitored and tracked by the powers that be. All of a sudden, a voice interrupted. The crystal was thought destroyed, but no, my friends, this is the real thing. The room seemed to darken and turn red as the flames were extinguished, the walls and floors morphing from concrete to wood. Luxurious furniture seemed to appear in the room as the statue of Hecate and cannabis plants disappeared, but the crystal remained. Goggles and Mark drew their weapons at the source of speech, realizing it was none other than Wynlock McAllister himself. Look, Rob, we don't want to have to shoot you, said Mark as he aimed his pistol between Wynlock's glowing green eyes. Wynlock swayed from side to side like a drunkard, unfazed by the weapons being pointed at him with dubious intent. He glided over to a shelf on the far side of the room and picked up a syringe filled with a dark green sap and a small bag of multicolored candy pills. This isn't heroin, he said as he presented the needleless syringe to the 2 strange gentlemen. I'm not rich enough for that. This is RSO, cannabis extracts. I worship cannabis, you see. Ever since that night I returned to the 1960s for a brief moment upon ingesting a medicated pink lemonade I had purchased the last time I saw the pencil shop pimp who was straight gangsta with gigabytes, and stayed on the grind with print shop Isaac, who smoked spliffs with crayon wrappers while riding pimped out skateboards as he hacked the NSA back in 2004. Place the syringe into a small cup of hot water lined with a plastic bag that you would use for nearby tray, on a table which rested a cup of tea and a small golden idol of the four-armed, blue-skinned, red-tongued goddess Kali. Dressed in small, severed human heads, she holds a severed head in one hand and a large sword in another. Her other two arms outreached, and some say she is associated with cannabis or Kali weed. It was back in the spring of 2020 when I really discovered the power of the herb. Wynlock continued. Yes, I ingested that pink lemonade and returned to the 1960s. Of course, I knew I really wasn't hallucinating. It's just my mind seemed to go there, you know. I saw the shag carpets, the posters of the rock stars taken by drugs at age 27, the hellscape of an unjustified, meaningless war projected on large, humming cathode ray tube monitors in the homes of America, the struggle for civil rights. The acid-tested waters of eternity seemed to spring out from the golden and violet fluid that was suspended in the lava lamp which sat upon the table, which the empty bottle of lemonade sat like so many sleeping sailors boiled alive in their lead coffins. He retrieved the syringe and placed a drop of the substance onto each candy. He moved his mask aside, revealing shining white teeth and a long violet tongue, and tossed the candies into his mouth, chewing the candies merrily and swallowing them, before reaching for a cup of tea and taking a sip, repositioning his mask afterwards. Earl Grey, it was my absolute favorite when I did dextromethorphan every day for several months in Valor, and that's the plant that grew outside on my patio about the nature of death through a telepathic communication that seemed to arise when I touched the plant's leaves. Stella, she said her name was. At least that's what I saw projected on the mirror as she stood on the other side, dressed in black garbs and dark makeup with a mechanical left arm, her translucent green skin glimmering beneath the fluorescent lights as sea serpents crawled out of the wall with a searing, burning glare of jealousy and hate. He took another sip. Goggles and Mark looked at each other with complete and utter confusion. What on earth was this maniac on about? They pondered. Should we just shoot him and say later that he was threatening us? Wynlock walked over to the crystal and picked it up and examined it. The plant told me that in the end there is no difference between the state of being alive and being dead. Your molecular structure breaks down like decaying plant leaves and becomes the soil in which wretched people fuck each other and kill, added to this disgusting biomass we call a planet, taking up even more finite space in this ever-shrinking galaxy of grandiosity. He takes another sip and places the cup down on the table before collapsing comfortably into a nearby armchair. We're all in this together, my friends, the plant said. We all break down in the end. He held the crystal up and threw it underhanded to Mark, who dropped his pistol and caught it. As Mark's pistol hit the floor, it discharged and sends a bullet into a nearby room. #headshot, as they said around that time, as the patrons bathed in the brains of a friendless wanderer of 24 who darted from place to place to find friends and love but only found rejection and silence. He drank a shot of cognac and took his prescription tramadol that night and woke up with shattered thoughts and a scattered mind. C'est la vie, Wynlock exclaimed with a sigh. Take the crystal. I'm tired of holding on to some old relic. Mark placed the crystal into his front pocket, creating an awkward bulge. Where did you get it? Asked Goggles inquisitively. I got that crystal from these two employees in the back of a dying retail store marked with a large K that was located in Longview, Texas back in 2011. I followed a series of signs that read chips this way and proceeded to an empty layaway counter in the back of the store that was largely unlit as they began to sell the light fixtures and turn off the power. The two employees had gecko-like features and pale orange skin. They stood about 2 meters tall and had 3 long thin fingers and black eyes with red irises. After some arguing between the two, they agreed to sell me 2 bags of these special tortilla chips for $2. The tortilla chips were seasoned with powdered habanero peppers and a secret smoky spice mixture of an unknown origin that seemed to also have a slight umami taste that hinted at possibly added glutamate. They were the greatest artificially flavored snack food I had ever tasted. At the bottom of the second bag was the crystal you now possess. Wynlock retrieved a small box from under the table, opening it to reveal 3 black licorice candy ropes that he offered to his guest. Take one of these licorice ropes that contains 600 milligrams of THC distillate with added live resin and cured terpenes. And if you're looking for a snack, the cafe on the third floor has his hard-shell blue corn taco with black beans, seasoned lettuce, and a non-dairy chipotle cream sauce that's excellent. Plus, the restaurant has this avant-garde, Hellenistic decor that's amazing. Mark picked up the pistol and holstered it before taking 2 licorice ropes, throwing one to Goggles, scarfing the licorice down and performing an ominous facepalm. Am I having a fucking stroke? Mark said quietly as he began to walk towards the exit, placing his hand on his forehead. Goggles consumed the licorice rope and followed him up the stairs slowly. Yeah, thank you, Mr. McAllister, for cooperating with our investigation, said Goggles as he holstered his gun. Yeah, sure, and, guys, Wynlock stopped them as Goggles almost escaped his view. Some of the guests upstairs are from way out of town and think that your costumes are racist, so use the staff exit, please. Alright, later. Goggles and Mark returned to the getaway car and placed the crystal in the trunk, or boot if your truck is a lorry, and drove away into the night back Captass HQ in Raton, New Mexico. The psychedelic rock blared over the car's stereo as they drove higher than any expectations of any retail employee through the northwest forest where protesters bit off their own fingers, the wasteland of California where residents are taxed into their early graves, the Arizonian deserts in which so many people have tried to cross the walled fence in search of a grand charade and have been shot in the back by the vested ones adorned with badges who aim their sniper rifles from watchtowers and so many other vantage points, and then finally to New Mexico where certain monetary gain awaits. Only its left wing crashes into a forest, killing several on board. In the aftermath of the crash, a rogue communist air marshal, whose pronouns I can't recall, in a twisted and patronizing tone asks the surviving passengers to line up and form a type of socioeconomic, sexual, and racial priority gradient. Alright, the lighter ones with more masculine traits in the front, the darker and more feminine amongst you can hide behind the seats. Eventually the bullets will hit you and you'll perish, but be given a few more minutes of life, said the air marshal to the terrified survivors. As for the fascists and the pigs in the front, even if you survive the initial few rounds, the collective will resuscitate you, hook you up to a few milking machines, and farm you for semen, blood, bile, and shit. We need raw materials to propagate our woken human automatons, who have traded that sick thing you fascists call free will for safety and sensitivity. Parthenogenesis is the name of the game, a new world order of the garishly nondescript. The air marshal cocks their pistol and puts it against a young boy's forehead. The marshal of the left-wing plane cares not for your children's hearts or minds, but for the labor and materials your children can provide. They will strap future generations to operating tables and take out their organs and pump out every bit of fresh water, so long as the water can be filtered and fed to someone underprivileged. Trace minerals of human nature, even in death, they contribute to the collective hordes. My dear viewer, in this instance, however, there was a happy ending indeed, as no men, women, children, etc. were murdered that day by the air marshal. As a large man, deer antlers atop his long flowing auburn mane, his body green like moss and eyes blackened with a never-ending void of oblivion, everlasting knowledge and necessary violence, should nature call upon it, walks out of the forest flanked on all sides by woodland animals of all types, from deer to squirrel, fox to wolf, badger to pillbug, snake to bear, eagle to mountain lion, and so many others. The man, which in this story we will call Carnunus, points to the bewildered air marshal as the animals begin to charge. The air marshal fires the pistol at the creatures, but is not able to hit anything but the trees, which watch this spectacle with their judging invisible eyes. The animals descend upon the air marshal and subsequently reduce them to a spot of crimson jelly on the forest floor below, with any solid remains eaten by the predators, unable or unwilling to consume the plant-based fair trade fabric the air marshal was clad in. The less ravenous amongst the animals simply used their claws and hooves to bludgeon the sick air marshal to death, and when it was all over, Carnunus led the beast back into the forest beyond the blackened tree line into the misty shadows of botanical retreat. Now, 2 years later, a survivor of the crash, who now goes by the name of Captain Astro the Glider of Handjobs, stands in an Irish pub on the south end of Ballard. He's dressed in purple left eye. He had a peg leg, and his hair was long, shaggy, and black. He was once a preacher, but he had lost all his faith in Peru. He worked as an activist, but leftists in Portland took out his eye. He performed music for degenerates and operas for thieves, but songs became auditory commercials after an award show in Qatar. So now, after a brief stint at working at a mattress accessory emporium in Vancouver, hiding liquor for teenagers and crates of avocados in the refrigerator of a burrito establishment in Northgate, and losing a leg in a disturbing incident involving a homicidal cassowary and a tub of yeast extract in New Zealand, and after adopting a pirate persona after losing a job weaving fishing nets in the frigid Cascadian cold, he found another unemployed drunken Friday night coming to a close. He stumbled into the pub and made his way towards the back of the establishment, garnering looks from harlot and old queen, both gorgeous and studly. He reaches the back of the bar and collapses into a darkened corner booth. It was after the fifth of rum, some isobutyl nitrite, and a couple of kratom capsules later, and he was back on the Valor docks, stumbling around, cursing Poseidon, and descending into a largely incoherent drunken rant. Not since I was thrown off the Newbury Rockport line by vile transit pigs into the streets of Lynn have I endured such discourtesy. He kicks a nearby beached walrus with his peg leg. The walrus looks at him and yawns. It's outrageous. There's some strange evil force that is continuing to perpetuate the human race. There's something out there that needs us for something. It's too evil to just let us all die and rest easy. No, it says more babies for the grinder, more meat for in the nursery, a cycle of endless suffering, never to be broken because you want the next generation to suffer just like you did. A lifetime of people raping and robbing and taking everything you hold dear. So what do? Have a little homunculus crawl from your slimy diseased nether regions just to grow up and destroy all we hold dear. Oh, fuck, out of the womb and straight into the father's mouth, choking on the bones of his cubs as the lioness uses the mucus in his death erection to give him more to eat, more children to trade, more innocence in the digested remnants of carry-on. I could get a gun at a supermarket and a bottle of tramadol in 2001, and now what do I get? Artificial rum and all-natural, non-GMO syphilis. And my old friend Samuel O'Flaherty raped at gunpoint by some cat who desperately wanted to get pregnant so that she could milk someone for money, and even after reporting this incident to the police, Sam was sucked dry of every fucking dollar he had for child support. The bitch would have gotten away with it, completely ruining his life and taking all he held dear. But one night in a fit of justifiable rage, he crept up the steps and decapitated the whore and her little parasite and blew out the brains of every pig that interrupted the joyous sounds of blood spraying and splattering from torn jugulars and deep arterial wounds. Eventually, Samuel dropped to the ground dead, looking like Swiss cheese with a smirk of satisfaction engraved on what remained of his face. I've known too many men die like Sam. Most only kill themselves, however, and no one gives a shit. Well, I can tell you one thing right now, motherfucker. If Sam wouldn't have killed the bitch, I would have run hell. The captain takes a swig of rum and climbs into a docked dinghy. The SS Ketamine, they called it. He covers up with an algae-encrusted fish tarp and passes out for the night. Across town near the airport, a convention is being held in an overpriced 3-star hotel. Distinguished fat junkies and gentlemen, I welcome you all out to the 70th annual meetup of perverts and follow fiends. The internet is going the way of the typewriter. The one was stomped out by innovation and the other one seemingly abandoned by all but the disgusting subscription-pushing bourgeoisie cunts. Those who trade in their privacy for financial gain and those who lurk in the backgrounds and sneak by like digital chameleons of the RGB spectrum. We dance in the voxels that line the hallways of these horrid conditions. Several dozen bodies in furry animal costumes stained with every possible body fluid are collapsed against the walls that line the hallway. Vixens, coyotes, ponies, lions, wolves, a few dragons here and there. These were furries, which, in the context of this story, are people that have an affinity for animals that are anthropomorphic or have human-like characteristics. Quite a few of them attend events like the one I am at in this tale. These events usually occur in hotels, and while the majority of them go on without incident, this particular on down a spiral staircase that led out into a large open room where the initial registration line once stood. Now tables were overturned, food and drink littered the floor, and a couple of animal cosplayers covered in bloodstains lie on the floor pierced with forks, but strangely alive and knocked out cold. I noticed a grand piano under another staircase, which sat at the other side of the room. I walked over to it and played a few simple melodies for a bit before getting bored and following another hallway past a large banquet hall that looked like it had been hit with a ballistic missile. The room was completely and totally trashed. The floor itself was totally covered in crusty, fur-clad anthropomorphs. A rabbit lies on her back with demented pinpoint eyes. A female wolf in black military attire with a strap on is passed out, slumped over in a doggy-style position behind a heavily made-up femboy zebra. Three pirate dragonesses, sticky vaginal microorganisms, swim in a sea of whiskey as they lick each other's bleeding orifices. And what seemed to be a gay orgy of queer foxes in the corner by the couch where the lack of light left much to the imagination, all but revealing some poor soul who underapplied the astro jelly and inserted a shard of glass a bit too far up his ass. The poor bastard spasmed with the twitches of orgasm and death as his eyes rolled backwards. Le petit mot indeed. I recall talking to my wise friend Jay as he lit a marijuana cigarette in front of a Cuban flag that stood in front of a blaring winter sun in a West New York park. After my indecency charges for accidentally showing strangers in Manhattan unicorn pornography of an incorporeal marshmallow variety were dropped. Jay said that in our pretentious hubris we lose ourselves up our own asses and turn inside out and find nirvana. You see things for what they are, your ego laying bare. Everything becomes clear so long as you don't get stuck and refuse to let go of everything you ever loved. Refusing to let go results in a path of fear and paranoia, and before you know it, the people in the streets will gaze upon you like some unholy hybrid leper and burn you at the stake. I think Jay may have been high before lighting that joint. In the banquet hall, there wasn't a place you could step without possibly injuring someone or engaging in accidental corpse beating. It was the aftermath of a wild sex party. Being uninterested in this foul orgy, I proceeded on to an enclosed glass foyer with an open roof that allowed viewing of the glass elevators that moved up and down against the hotel's other buildings' towers that stood off in the distance. An overcast evening sky loomed overhead. A furry dressed as a cheetah had performed a doomed skateboard trick off a balcony, and now he lies in pain with fractured shins against a large flower bed that lies in the center of the foyer. Totally bogus. He proclaimed his vixens in skimpy nurse attire, loaded him on a stretcher, and took him off to God knows where. On a bench near a door that led to the other side of the hotel, I saw another human, a man dressed as a medieval crusader, typing away at his cell phone. He was a member of a medieval-themed boy band called the Lads from Leicester. The music was like something straight out of the year 1999, and their live performances seemed to always go awry because of some technical issue, or some problems involving the heavy suits of knight's armor that each of the 5 members wore on stage. How they danced and sung in that armor is beyond me. I walked through the foyer and waved to the knight, who waved back and proceeded to continue doing whatever he was doing. I went back inside and entered a room where a series of landline telephones divided by modesty panels once stood, now replaced by USB charging outlets, with no attempt to disguise the marks on the wall where the phones were once mounted. My cell phone battery was depleted, so I plugged my charger into the wall and made plans to return to the place that I temporarily called home. I let the phone charge for a bit before eventually heading towards the entrance that lies past a small restaurant and lost and found. As I approached the door, I heard a female voice behind me say, "Excuse me, are these your glasses?" I turned around to see no one. I looked down to see my prescription eyeglasses, which I guess I had left back at the phone booth. I picked them up and put them on, looking to my right to see a bar with a sign in front advertising a series of non-alcoholic mixed drinks, as all the alcoholic beverages were allegedly served back in the banquet hall where the inactive bodies of persona long departed lie dormant with pale fish-eyed irises and blue-tinged skin. I approached the bar to see this rather normal-looking 50-something-year-old man mixing blue sports potions and gold energy drinks, both of which, if combined on their own and bought elsewhere, would be but a quarter of the price this man was selling them for. He had the eyes of a tired, reluctant restaurateur of a second generation, possibly the son of the original owner who took over the establishment after the original owner retired and decided to take up snowboarding in Aspen at age 78. Now this poor bastard by the name of Mike was stuck with the family business and the obligations that came with it, like running the bar for a convention of sexual deviants in expensive mascot outfits. Hopefully the bastards won't wake up after that last cocktail. What can I get you, Normie? Better not be another pervert trying to purchase my 14-year-old daughter, exclaimed Mike. I looked at the man with total bewilderment. What in the hell was he on about? No, sir, I don't want your daughter. Just give me, the marina, I said, even though the drink was a ripoff like I stated previously. I paid the $9 for a small plastic cup of green caffeinated electrolyte sugar water, thanked the overworked man, and continued out the exit door to the parking lot. There were no furries in the parking lot outside that I could see, but the cough syrup was really kicking in. I walked out of the hotel parking lot and down the street towards the airport light rail station. The streetlight shimmered as my vision shattered like a million broken mirrors. The light faded back in. I was on a mountaintop, and a king in red robes and a golden crown adorned with jewels of different varieties summons green lightning bolts from the stormy black sky. The king's face melts away, revealing muscle tissues and fine like bone and cartilage, as a large emerald shockwave causes the storm to disappear, and the sky to brighten. The sun rises and shines down upon the mountaintop. A long banquet table and 11 chairs appears complete with cuisines of every variety. At the end of the table sits a man with pale skin and high cheekbones. He is surrounded by shining celestial god beams. He has one eye blue and one eye gray, and short spiked strawberry blonde hair that covers one eye and a 5 o'clock shadow. We're builders, he said softly as we were seemingly transported to another realm. Now the man and I stood in this vast library with towering bookcases, seemingly holding every book known to man. The library's tall walls were decorated with Hellenistic carvings and lush greenery. Statues of the gods were lined along a man-made waterfall that bathed the statues in ambrosia. Crepuscular rays shined in from great skylights in the ceiling that covered the library in a golden hue. A burgundy tapestry depicts a female Olympian jumping over a charging bull. The library seemed as if it were the lost library of Alexandria. There was so much knowledge and seemingly so much potential. The man holds his hands out towards me and ponders a bronze sledgehammer and hands it to me. We have nothing left to gain from creation, as creation has produced negative results. The time for destruction is now. Reluctantly, I began to swing the sledgehammer, destroying objects whose values are in the eyes of beholders. Value worthlessness doesn't change the fact that it's there. It's all there. All the molecules, all the thoughts, all the words, all the atoms, all there. The question is whether or not death is a complete and total end. I definitely don't have the answer to that question, but it is from my understanding that deep down we all have the answer to the question of what happens after we die, said the man. Within a flash, the scene was over and 2 figures stood over me as I lay there on the sidewalk. The sky was pitch black, and a cold winter wind blew icy crystals of frosted doom. Hey bud, you okay there, eh? The figure slowly came into focus. 2 police officers in furry animal costumes, one dressed as an Alaskan Malamute, and the other one was a moose. Oh sorry, I began. I was just heading home and I had a bit too much to drink. The 2 looked at each other and then looked back at me. Oh, well, were you at the convention? The Alaskan Malamute said as his radio emitted background chatter. 420 in progress. I nodded my head and looked at both of the name tags sewed on their uniforms. The Malamute's name tag read Corporal Damon, the Moose, Sergeant Trudeau. Okie dokie, well, we can give you a ride home in our police cruiser, eh? But first, you have any weapons on you, my guy? Asked Sergeant Trudeau. Just a pocket knife, I replied. Well, I gotta take that from you for the duration of the ride, but don't worry, eh? You'll get it back, guy. I reluctantly handed my knife to the Moose and followed the 2 to the police cruiser, the newly formed snow audibly cracking beneath our feet. Corporal Damon opened the back door of the cruiser as Trudeau got into the driver's seat. I climbed inside the cruiser and struggled with the seatbelt because I'd yet to have been arrested for any reason and had no idea how a police cruiser seatbelt worked. Well, that night was tripping balls. The back door slammed as Corporal Damon got into the passenger seat and the car sped away. I gave them my address and we started towards my place of residence, stopping at a drive-thru along the way as the 2 in the front seat gorged themselves on greasy food-laden trans fats of old. The meals were in purple cardboard boxes with a picture of the restaurant chain's CEO and some randomized statement about munchies aimed at stoners. Both meals included a cheeseburger topped with fried jalapenos stuffed with cheese on a buttery brioche roll, 2 hard-shell tacos, and a mixture of curly and crinkle-cut fries. Both orders also included large diet sodas. After a conversation about the police departments getting defunded and Corporal Damon having a bit of a breakdown about how he can't arrest anyone without being canceled on social media anymore because it was the late 2010s and that sort of thing was all the rage. We eventually arrived outside our destination. Okie dokie, well, you go in there and you get some sleep now, bud, okay? Said Sergeant Trudeau as I exited the car and began to walk towards the house. Hey, thanks guys, I appreciate it, I replied. Just then I noticed I was missing something important in my pocket. Hey, is there any way I could get my knife back? I asked them as I walked back towards the driver's seat window, keeping my hands out of my pocket so I wouldn't get gunned down by the furry police. That would be embarrassing. Time seemed to completely stop as that moose bastard looked me dead in the eye with those stupid-looking antlers and dumbass eyes of syrupy discord and proceeded to flip me off with his dirty weapon-thieving fingers and reply, "Not a chance, you fucking hoser." And with that bizarre exchange, the two officers rode into the night, only to later use my pocket knife in a failed convenience store robbery and both end up behind bars, and I still haven't received my knife. Dietrich Merlot, a once famed fashion designer disillusioned with both the fashion industry and the indestructible evil that lies upon the dainty disenchantment that dwells within the hearts of the disheveled and the well-received. Behind every door and on every window they pulled and they groped until not even the feeling of the finest grade Afghan hashish cut with pure pharmacy grades and opium sold for the devil's fourth floor of an eastern fish market could do nothing to numb her melancholy. So she lay there, flat, looking out the window at the city filled to the brim with an empty void that precedes the antimatter that walks upon you and I. The commercial purpose that stalked artistic expression in the seedy back alleys of the darkest side of financial desperation, which the chronically dependent and commercially inclined often frequent. Money can only keep you out of the grave so long, so many decide to use it on the luxury casket that encases it and stares the mind's eye and blows the whistle to sick the hounds of materialism and mono-perceptionalism upon the war-natured animal that we once called the soul and we now call an influencer. She lies there in her violet satin robes and drinks a cup of chamomile tea. Her bright blue eyes shine through her violet wine-and hair with a frozen nostalgia as she reflects on her past adventures and escapades. How she and her friend Ashley McCall would drink ayahuasca and dance under moonlight starry skies. She remembered her time in Tangiers when she witnessed two women stab each other to death over a mandrel in a hash den. And she'll never forget the time she spent as a rogue teenager in the open air of the new millennium as mankind acknowledged its progress and embraced its newfound technologies with a sort of futuristic aesthetic that seemed to be all-encompassing and moving at light speed. A brief point in time when all potential was out in front of us without the prying eyes of evil authorities. As our technologies progress, so did the limits of what the common person can do with them without repercussions. If no limits seem present, you better believe they have their greasy hands on the power switch and every eye electrical and otherwise glaring at you with the fibrous detriment of a billion subatomic capitalist particles in the hands of a careless jackass on a drunken elephant's back. I can't tell you there's an afterlife, Miss Merlot, but I can tell you one thing's for certain. They may tolerate us for now, but give them a few years and they'll rip us to shreds. It's getting less and less popular to be alive, so the next thing to do is die and die well. There's no positions nearly to the point of breaking. For the veins had become weathered from the years of plasma donations that will be hoarded by the fortunate high on the hills of Medina as an anemic shot full of holes by police passes away and becomes some forsaken and unloved debris caught in the gutters. Someone screams their last scream as a scalpel slips, and out goes the eye, and comes the blade cutting through the psyche like a Geisen cut through the books of yesteryears. A receptionist talks loudly over the crowd of dying patients. Don't mind the dying woman over in the corner, privacy concerns and all, no medicine for you junkies, you're not in pain, pain is for you idiots who didn't go to college to become uber-bitches like us, and our armor made of paper adorned with a seal of worthiness. Roll call time, who has the patience to be patient this evening? To misquote Diogenes the dog, I can't tell the bones of your ancestors from the bones of your slaves. Broken ribs, left side, help the poor girl, don't help me, help her, she can't breathe, someone cries. So they wheeled her out into the maintenance hallway to suck her out of sight. How dare you drip your peasant blood onto our polished hardwood floors we bought with more money, barked the receptionist. Dr. Green walks past the smoking pavilion at Brentwood Middle Hospital, stopping to admire the lush greenery and finish his bottle of a modern interpretation of blue paregoric. He spots the blonde nurse Valerie puffing on a methylated vaporizer filled with synthetic nicotine derived from various species of bioengineered nightshade. Dr. Green approaches and begins his unprompted drug-induced conversation. Hey, Valerie, did I ever tell you about Kidney Stone Keith? Once back in the backwoods of West Monroe, that eventually led to Shreveport, and eventually to Dallas, I learned of a gentleman named Kidney Stone Keith. Now, Keith was a professor at a local college that specialized in turning the mildewed brains of high school students raised on crack cocaine and rides in the back of patrol cars into fully functioning members of society well-versed in the historical and secret mysteries of the art of the jester. Even though Keith threw insults and F-shaped balloons at his students on a regular basis, the kids loved him, not necessarily always in a manner that would make Hollywood pedophiles cackle, but in a warped, sardonic, talking reflection sort of way, showing them the flaws he perceived and addressing them in a joking manner without the slightest echoes of unnaturally harsh punishment. He wore a mask made of white vinyl resembling that of a skull, adorned with blinking red and white balls that hung from each corner of his red and black jester's cap. A bright blue polo shirt embroidered with the word stress in gold letters that shined like a dagger in the back of Divus Julius in the theater of Pompey around 44 years before the birth of the silver Jesus fish. He kept half-drunk gin bottles in file cabinets. He took guns from the back pockets of violent patrons at a haunted house in the Longview, Texas swamp. I saw this as I danced with the bones of a dead woman. I broke off her arm and I used it as a whip. I was a dominatrix for a weekend, you see, but we're not talking about me or some dead woman. We're talking about Keith here. In the summer months, when class was dismissed, Keith would retreat to Canyon City, Colorado, and smoke cannabis with the fair trade fan people who traveled by raft down the rivers of sharp and rusty railroad equipment discarded in the 1870s. Once he had told his students a story about a friend of his named Darren Saltine. Darren accompanied Keith to Colorado one year, and he had been thrown from the raft by the rapids and landed eye-first through a large railroad spike. By the time they found his body, mountain goats were licking the salt off his skin, as he always was, a salty fellow. Keith was known to intimidate people around him. As many rumors circulated that he was once a Navy SEAL or possibly CIA, and that he had killed dozens of people. Now I don't think any of that is true, but from what I've heard, his mother worked with nuclear materials in the 1940s, and his father was a Texan carrying a rifle through the then recently post-war Japan. But we can't blame Keith for any of the atrocities that may have arisen from his parents pursuing their given occupations. He had allegedly worked as an arms dealer in the 1980s, and I personally gave him a guided tour of our body storage facility. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. Reddish and off-white mannequins made of human muscle, organs, and bones, with white fibrous tissues hanging off of them like torn burlap strips or ripped drywall tape, were posed in every which way with fake molded smiles. They were bodies donated from China. Some were stripped of nothing but their circulatory systems and looked like they were made up entirely of red woolen yarn. Others were cut vertically or horizontally into translucent two-dimensional sheets like rare steaks. A headless and skinless human torso with half its arms is perched atop a pedestal under lights like a museum exhibit. Human human fetuses and stillborn of all varieties in jars of yellowish-green fluid with stomachs torn open, set in the dark corners of the room on dusty, desolate shelves. Severed testicles and penises, a shade of chalk in glass cases, lie petrified next to an entire female reproductive system, stretched out about a meter, showcasing every internal organ. It even still had some gray skin and some hair around its opening. I could talk about it for hours. If anything bothered Keith the most, it was the one half of the human head cut vertically with its internals presented like a shucked oyster. A look of absolute anguish on the dead man's face. I would have thought he would have been more concerned about the kidney exhibit, as Keith had been known to have a habit of ending up in hospitals because of his sheer reluctance in having to pay the multitude of millions needed to see a doctor to remove painful calcium deposits that occurred from time to time in his kidneys. And one day, as he was screaming and bleeding profusely when the pain got too painful and the others chose to prolong his life by calling the paramedics and the green ambulance emblazoned with the words "In God We Trust" and the lights ready to be turned off, and the patient inevitably dies from negligence. And the ambulance bill goes on to kick and beat and bruise anyone left in the familiar distance to the deceased, like the pregnant widow who hangs herself and her unborn child on bleeding fallopian tubes to secrete the meat to be castrated and thrown in a ditch of eternal bereavement when daddy comes home in a metal takeout container. This is the fate that awaited those closest to Keith as they loaded him into the vehicle, as onlookers taunted and discredited his pain. "It doesn't hurt as bad as being in labor. You'll never know what it's like," some old cunt shouted. Keith breathed heavily as the kidney stone slowly infected and liquefied his tissues with a caustic inflammation. "I'm sorry, lady," Keith replies with a grin. "The difference between you and I is the simple, unquestionable fact that I didn't ask to be injected up the lower orifices with the literal sharpness of a billion multifaceted razors, while you were more than likely compliant in giving oxygen to your future doorstop baby." He tackled madly through the screams of bitter agony as the ambulance doors closed on him one more time. On the way to the hospital, they shot him up with hydromorphone to the point of coma and accidentally dropped him in transit on the stretcher onto the concrete outside and cracked his skull on the pavement. His brain swelling, bleeding, and rattling around the thoughts of his sad, depressed wife and wolf children raised by pornographic softcore machines with hard drives. Local unemployed scammers in the world of those long buried in peat bogs and desert tombs being torn asunder, only for the nurses to strike the final blow, ending the clown's Socratic stand-up routines and razor-sharp wit that delighted and enthralled those living amongst the bullet-ridden crack houses and abandoned gas stations of the Treehood. Without clowns, we spend our days blinded and led astray by the joyless temptations and false hopes of woke Hollywood correctness, licking the boots of the ones holding our leash, forgetting the mistakes of the past as Uncle Sam's and Carrie nations take turns ripping the newly formed by order of Social Security number and the amount they can attain when their playthings outlive their usefulness, and they call upon Dr. Mengele to deal out the most American of justice, as many of former presidents would say through caustic white smiles. Adolf built the camps and Columbus sketched the blueprints. This is a room with a single exit. How you get in the room's a mystery, but when you walk in the footsteps of Kidney Stone Keith, make sure your body is hidden well, because when the dead walk, the paychecks will be keloid scarred backs and automated biomilking. Or perhaps you'd like to be a crash test dummy. Either way, they get their more money. Nurse Valerie, realizing that this man was actually a patient who had escaped the psychiatric ward moments ago, calls for the orderlies to sedate the strange man and take him back to his room. These sorts of things always happen on my breaks. She says that she heads back to work for another 16-hour shift. She returns home at night for a break, takes mushrooms and amphetamines, and returns to work. Never missed a day. There's nothing acceptable but the extraordinary. There's nothing interesting but the mundane. Can I walk through a dark room without passing out as the heavenly sisters of sleep and death put on their orange, green, and purple robes and lead me into a carnival of the carefree? The worst part about buying more is that sick feeling you get when you realize that the next batch will run out too, and then wham, bam, you're back in line again. I recall a time where I could access a computer and search the web and find data grounded in observable fact and impartiality in regards to a balance of opposing sides of the chaos of nature and the shackles of social expectations. They interrupt your entertainment and thank the sponsor, and the priest thanks God. Now we live in a world ruled by what I can only describe as the highest example of small-minded, parasitic, and frankly psychotic self-abuse, total dependency on the other degenerate given exited the taxi and arrived at my destination, a destination that didn't lie under a warm sun, but in an anemic, stormy sky. The outside of a cafe I once frequented long ago. I recall around Halloween of 2017, I was in Salem, Massachusetts, to perform at a silent disco, where I would broadcast a musical performance to wireless headphones at the fountain by the town mall in order to comply with the city's ridiculous noise ordinance. I was at the gig when all of a sudden I was abducted by 3 witches from South Carolina. They smoked diet cigarettes and got us lost in a misty haunted graveyard. We walked to the Temple of Satan but didn't have enough money to take a tour. They vandalized pumpkins and cried of blistered heels on painted doorsteps. I was left at the train station with nothing of value. When I returned to the venue for the silent disco, the event organizer, a thin brunette of about 35 years old, who wore expensive cardigans on her shoulders and an accessory clip-on plush wolf tail on her ass by the name of Elena O'Hare, had canceled the show and fled to Reno to marry a man that she had met only once. The last time I saw her, we were locked in the trunk of a stolen sedan by 2 truckers from Springfield. Upon escaping this grueling scenario, I stumbled into a dark alleyway up a flight of creaking stairs and discovered the Cafe Vaudou. The outside of the cafe blended into a row of old red brick buildings that held ancient apartments, salons combing style, old-time boutiques, and dockside spice stores, all of which were owned and operated by a coven of witches. Outside the Cafe Vaudou hung a wooden sign bearing the cafe's name and its mascot, a black cat with bright yellow eyes and white makeup in a fuchsia top hat, holding a sandwich in one paw and a cup of sweet tea in the other. The Cafe Vaudou was an eatery open all night long that served New Orleans-style muffalettas along with an assortment of teas, coffees, and sandwiches of seemingly Caroline and their cat Ipswich, who could allegedly sing about as good as Sinatra, still operate the cafe to this day, but don't like to talk about that little incident. Father Patrick picked up his order and began to head out the door before waving to the two strange men and reciting one more quotation. The separate ones own the sun, the frontier, our customs, and our refinement of language. Gentle mortal, thou shalt fan thy moonbeams with carcinogenic fingers, Justin, son. You shall rehearse your play as a nurse. Now, me sons, I must retire for noble homespun palms of the Nile, wrap a cornucopia of choice noted weed, like the Southians who walked on clouds before us. Father Patrick tipped his hat and reached into the pocket of his robe, retrieving a palm-wrapped cannabis blunt dipped in holy rosin. He lit it up and took a few puffs before walking down the snowy streets out of sight. Godspeed, Father Patrick. Godspeed. Sylv and Rex were later arrested that night after a pimp whose name I will not mention took notice of Rex failing to pay for services provided and kicked down Rex's apartment door and beat the fuck out of him. In a panic, Sylv grabbed a ceramic dinner plate that I sold him when I worked at the Northgate department store, smashed it against the oven's glass door, and proceeded to stab the pimp with the broken shards of the dinner plate. Police, who in this town walk along the streets in a swarm with witches adoring their patches and uniforms, and the few patrol cars they possess, immediately stormed the apartment building just as the fight broke out between Sylv and Rex. Rex had grabbed a hammer and was trying to beat Sylv to death with it before being bitch-slapped by the police. I haven't heard from either of them since. I know that the pimp survived, bought some new threads, and returned to his profession. Unfortunately, the pimp insurance only covered the costs of the hat, cane, and fur coat, so he had to pay for everything else out of pocket. I walked into the cafe and picked up my 3 sandwiches that I had ordered via mobile phone application on the ride over, before walking to the bus stop and waiting on the next bus ride back through the Vale. I sat there in my worn-out shoes and tattered black clothes, and after a period of rest, I opened my eyes, only to realize that I was back in Seattle once more. I set my bag on the bus stop bench and gazed at the mountains obscured by mist and radio communication towers blinking and sending signals off in the distance. A crowd of starving fentanyl addicts lingered around and asked me for blues and cigarettes. The rain obscured my vision as a man yelling chants of proclaimed racial superiority attempted to grab my bag because he thought his actions were just. I pulled out my knife and took off 3 of his fingers. He screamed and ran away, trailing diseased blood as a hungry pine marten leapt from some nearby shrubbery and devoured the man's fingers merrily. Ravens flew overhead and let out welcoming screams of avian profanity as an orca feasts on a diver to the cheers of delighted first graders. Buildings are torn down after being constructed a year prior. No time for preservation here. I cleaned the blood from my blade and boarded the bus. The driver drank a can of malt liquor and talked of the heroin dance. After paying for the service that no one else seems to pay for, I left behind this realm without reason.